Thank you, Yvonne and Gary, or Greg. So I used to sing Yvonne and Gary. So. Well, you'll notice in your bulletins there are two sets of notes today. One set is kind of introducing the whole book of Daniel, and then we're going to tackle the first chapter. So that's why you have two sets of notes in there. And so first will be the introduction to Daniel. And this is a book in the Old Testament, the last of the major prophets, and the way our Old Testament is arranged. The Jewish Old Testament, well, they don't call it the Old Testament, but they have it arranged in a slightly different order in their Bibles, but in ours it's the last of the major prophets there in the Old Testament. And so whenever you come to a book, this one has a lot of imagery in it. It has a lot of prophecy, some of which has been fulfilled to the letter. And if you study history, you think, wow. And some of it is yet to be fulfilled and can give us a glimpse of what's going to happen. But also, this book was written during a time when Israel was at their lowest point, or the kingdom of Judah. That they had been taken in by Nebuchadnezzar. He had conquered them. They had been taken captive to Babylon. And then God revealed to the prophet Daniel what was coming in the future, showing that, well, God is in control. Even when things look like they're out of control around us, even when we look around at the earthly kingdoms and think, okay, God, are you in control? And we might wonder things like, well, is North Korea going to get the nuke and then drop a nuclear bomb on us? Or we wonder what's going on there or other places. But God is in control even of the Gentile nations. So as we start off, we come first to, the author. Who wrote it? Well, Daniel, if the text is taken at face value, and I would say, yes, take the text at face value. There are many more liberal interpreters that don't. Now, why would they take it that way? Well, some of it is because the prophecy is so detailed and fulfilled that they say, that prophecy like that is impossible. Well, yeah, it is. God knows the future. He's got it all planned out. He knows what he's doing. And so if you take the text at face value, it's Daniel. Other places in the Bible that Daniel is referred to, you see Ezekiel 14:14 and 20 and 28:3 refers to Daniel. And then what should really settle it for us that Daniel is the author, Jesus in Matthew 24:15 to 16 calls Daniel the author. When he says, when you see the abomination of desolation, and that was spoken of by Daniel the prophet. So there, Jesus is saying, Daniel wrote this book. And, I think we can take Jesus for what he says, and it is true. Now, some claim it was a writer in the 2nd century BC. That was during the Maccabean revolts. That was up to the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, who is one that he did set up an abomination of desolation in the temple. He brought in a statue of Zeus, and he slaughtered a pig on the altar because he wanted to stamp out the Jewish religion. He wanted them to be more Greek, and in fact, he tried to make himself out to be God. And he made, the image of Zeus on the coins with his features, and he called himself God on the coinage. And so he was trying to stamp out the Jews and say, well, no, worship me. Be Greek instead of being Jewish. And some claim it was several writers, and they say, well, the first half was written now, and then the second half then. But we can take the Bible for what it says, and that Daniel wrote it. And so if you take it at face value, which you should, Daniel wrote this book. But then when was it written? Well, then we come to date. 605 BC to 535 BC. 605 BC was, this would be when it was taking place. Daniel could have written this later in his life like memoirs. But 605 BC was when Nebuchadnezzar came right at first to go against Jerusalem. That they just had the Battle of Carchemish, where the Pharaoh Necho went up to try and fight against Nebuchadnezzar. They clashed. Pharaoh lost. If you remember, that then he came down and he conquered all those lands around Syria, Palestine, and all of that. So it was during the Neo-Babylonian Empire, early Medo-Persian Empire. The Neo-Babylonian Empire didn't last too long. You had Nebuchadnezzar's father kind of got things rolling. Nebuchadnezzar really built it up. Then after Nebuchadnezzar, you had several different kings. And Nabonidus was the last king of Babylon. But he tried to change their religion, and he went 1,000 miles away, and he left as the guy in his place was Belshazzar that Daniel tells us about. You'll notice Belshazzar says, anyone who can interpret the handwriting on the wall, I will give him the third place in the kingdom. And, well, why not second? Well, Belshazzar was second in the kingdom, so he was offering the position right below him. And so then the rulers during this time, you had Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar is mentioned, Darius the Mede, Cyrus the Great are talked about. Daniel skips over some of the rulers there. But that it was during this time that the book was written. That it was during that Medo-Babylonian Empire, early Medo-Persian Empire. Then we come to historicity, and this is where, is it historical? Is it really telling us the truth, or was it written later and prophecy after the fact and all of that? Well, that's if you throw out that God knows the future and can inspire a prophet to write it. But God can do that. And so there's some things that people throw out that, oh, these are problems. These show that the author really didn't know his history. And, well, no, he was writing during that time. The first was the dating of Nebuchadnezzar's siege. And because Jeremiah says it happened in, I believe, the third year of Jehoiakim, and then Daniel says 1 year different. Well, there were two different dating methods for the reign of a king. One counted an ascension year and then year one at the new year. So, like say if someone became king of America in, say, October, that would be, they wouldn't count that year as their first year, then they would start January 1st, because that's our new year. And then the other method counted the ascension year as the first year, so if someone became king in October, even though there's only a couple of months there, they'd say that's year one, then the next year would start year two. It's two different methods of doing it. So Jeremiah used one method, Daniel used the other, and so there's really not a problem there. The second is Darius the Mede, and some say, well, see here, the writer of Daniel thought that there was a Median Empire and then the Persian Empire later, and we really don't know of a Darius the Mede. He was thinking of Darius who came later in Persia. Well, no, if you read the text really closely, it says that Darius was made the king of Babylon. Well, if you come in and conquer it, you're not made the king. You're not appointed the king. You are the king by force. And so Darius was not the king of the Median Empire. He was just a Mede who was set upon the throne by Cyrus to administer Babylon, most likely. That he was, some think he maybe was Cyrus, and this was a different name because Darius is actually kind of like a title, kind of like Pharaoh. It was in their language that meant, one who was king. And so they think, well, maybe Cyrus used a different name in Babylon than he used over there. Kind of like, I think even in the kings of England, you'd have, was it James the First of the Scots, but he was James the Fourth of England or something like that. Or maybe I'm wrong there, but even in England's history, we see some of that. But probably it was a governor that Cyrus put over Babylon to administer it while he went on another military campaign, and then later came back and was shown to be king of Babylon as well. So Cyrus, the Persian conqueror that went and then did that. Then there is Belshazzar. And of course people pointed this and we don't even see a Belshazzar in the king list of Babylon, so they must have been wrong. Well, then when you start doing archaeology and find things, they actually found there was a Belshazzar who was the co-regent, the second in command under Nabonidus. And so it is not ahistorical at all. that he, being second in command, then was co-regent with his father Nabonidus, who wanted to change gods in Babylon, and he was off 1,000 miles away, so Belshazzar was the one who was in control of Babylon at that time. And so he was even found in some different texts and lifted up then as a co-regent with his father. And then they'll point out the Greek and Persian loan words and say, well, see, you got, these aren't all Hebrew, aren't all Aramaic words, that there's some Persian words, and the Persian words are ones used for government officials. And Daniel served in the Persian government, so wouldn't it make sense that he used Persian words for Persian officials? You know, makes sense that you would have that. Then the Greek loan words were for musical instruments, that they would use the Greek names from, kind of like we use the original language names even for like piano or violin or viola or some of those, they're loan words from Italy or that sort of thing. So it's the same thing. And there was also evidence of Greeks trading with Babylon and even fighting with them as mercenaries. So it's not like these cultures were divided and never had interaction with each other. And then if they were trading in musical instruments, well, then those words would be kept. And also, like I say, Persia was in power when Daniel wrote, so Persian government awards are expected. And then, of course, you have the big reason behind all of this, that many believe predictive prophecy is impossible. So it must be later because I can't believe that there can actually be predictive prophecy. No, God can do that. God knows the future. In fact, in Isaiah, that's the challenge he lays down to the false gods, saying, well, tell the future if you can. Well, only God can do that. Only God can tell the future. And so this predictive prophecy is not impossible for God. He knows the end from the beginning, and he can inspire a prophet to reveal it. Then we come to genre. What kind of writing is this? Well, first of all, it's narrative. It tells stories. And you go through the first 6 chapters of it, and you see the narrative. And then it's also apocalyptic, which is where imagery is used. And from Longman, I use these different aspects of it. That it's eschatological, talks about the end times. It's mediated, so it comes through a mediator. So Daniel saw these visions, and he had an angel that was describing them to him and interpreting them for him. There's unusual images. I mean, we don't usually see, a beast with 4 horns, and just they're unusual images. It usually comes when the writer is under oppression. So Daniel, they have been taken over by Babylon, so he's under oppression. But yet there's an optimistic determinism. God's in control and it's going to be all right. And as Longman put it, it said an overly neat distinction between prophets and apocalypticists is this. A prophet afflicts the comforted. You remember the prophet said, you have broken God's covenant and judgment is coming. That's the prophets to Israel and Judah. The apocalyptic seer comforts the afflicted, saying, oh, God is going to overthrow these oppressors. Good times are coming. God is still in control. Then we come to language. This is an interesting thing with this book, is that chapters 1 and 8 to 12 are in Hebrew. And the first part of chapter 2 is, and then it says, they spoke to the king in Aramaic, and then everything from there on to 7 is in Aramaic, which was the trading language of that time. It was the language that if you wanted to be able to move about in the empire, you would know that language. Kind of like a lot of people now learn English, because that's a trade language that is being used. And so if you want to get ahead in the world, you know English. And so Aramaic became that. Later it became Greek. And that's why the New Testament was written in Greek. That was the language that most people knew at that time. And so if you wanted to write a letter to someone that everybody could read, you'd write it in Greek. And part of the reason for this could be that the history that deals with the empire and things that the Gentiles want to know is written in the language the Gentiles knew. And then the Hebrew sections, they deal with Israel. They tell what's going to happen with Israel. And so it's kind of interesting in that you have those Aramaic sections. And then some have even tried to say, well, the Aramaic isn't the right era for 605 BC, and they've been shown with modern discoveries with other Aramaic texts that no, that's not the case. And finally, we come to theology. So what does it teach? Well, Daniel shows that God is in control of human events. God knows what he's doing. He's in control. Even kings are under God's control. Even kings have to follow God, and evil will fight mercilessly against God. We see that in the parts that detail what Antiochus would do. And times will be tough, but we can trust God. So then, let's flip over to chapter 1 of Daniel. So we got kind of the background of the book. Let's start then looking at the book and what it's going to tell us. Daniel chapter 1. And we can read through this real quick. It says, in the 3rd year, the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the vessels of the, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. And the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate, and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food, or at the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. Then Daniel said to the steward whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So we listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king, and in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the 1st year of King Cyrus. So we start with disaster. That disaster came upon Judah. They had sinned. They had broken God's covenant. The prophets had gone to them over and over and over again saying, you are breaking God's covenant, and if you do, judgment will come. Well, they didn't listen. Judgment came. There was disaster. And it tells us here in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and he besieged it. And so here the powerful king comes. He comes to Judah and he besieged it. And he didn't destroy it at this time, but the Lord gave Jehoiakim into his hand, also with some of the vessels of the house of God. So some of the things from the temple were taken by Nebuchadnezzar, and then he took them back to the land of Shinar, to the temple of his God, basically showing, my gods gave me this victory. My gods were greater than their God. Well, the only real God would show Nebuchadnezzar that wasn't true. but that God had let them do this because they were being punished by God. And also, if you remember the land of Shinar, where else have you heard that about the land of Shinar? If you go clear back to the book of Genesis, Shinar is where the Tower of Babel happened, and where God separated their languages as a punishment because they had come together to try and defy God and there build a tower to the heavens. And that basically going over into idolatry. And so then the king commanded his chief eunuch to bring some of the good people of Israel, some of the royal line. And so Daniel and his friends were part of the royal line. They were part of the nobility and royalty there. And they were then brought to the king's palace to be taught the wisdom of the Chaldeans, to be able to be in Nebuchadnezzar's government, to serve him. And this could maybe bring some unity to the empire, that they would say, well, if we rebel, maybe he'll treat the people he took away poorly, so maybe try and keep them in check, and also maybe send them back to oversee, and maybe they'd be accepted. But the king gave them a daily portion of his food and wine, and then they were to be educated for 3 years. And the Persians, they would educate youths like this starting at about 15 and then go for 3 years. So they think, maybe the Babylonians did the same thing. And so the age of Daniel and his friends at this time is probably right around 15 years or something like that. And among these then were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And then they changed their names. Now if you look at their names, that their Hebrew names, you notice that they all relate to God. You have Daniel, so Elohim, that talks about God. You have Hananiah, Yah, which Yah would be short for Yahweh. And you also have, Mishael. You have the El and Azariah. So they had names that dealt with God, that they said something about the God of Israel. And so to bring them more into Babylon, they changed their names to have Babylonian gods in their names. So Daniel was called Belteshazzar. So Bel was one of the gods of the Babylonians. That Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael, Meshach, and that Ak was another one of their gods. Azariah was called Abednego, that Nego or Nebo was one of their gods. And so changing their names, trying to say, oh no, see, our gods are the true gods. And so their names were changed. But what we see here is that sin brings God's judgment. Israel sinned and it brought God's judgment. But yet we also see God's love and mercy, that even in judgment, God provided for his people. That even in judgment, he provided for them. They weren't utterly destroyed. That Daniel would play a pivotal role there in the government of Nebuchadnezzar, but also giving hope to people by the visions that he saw. But from disaster, we see that there was faithfulness. That Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. That the meat probably was sacrificed to a pagan god. That the wine would have been poured out as a drink offering, sacrificed to a pagan god. I would imagine that they would have things that were unclean to eat. So maybe there was pork up there or things like that. And Daniel's like, I can't do that. I can't break my God's law. And so he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor. And that instead of the eunuch just saying, no, eat what I gave you. No, I'm afraid because if you look sickly, the king told me to give you this. And if he finds out I changed the plan and you look sickly, I might lose my head. Literally, he might be killed. And so he was afraid for that. So then Daniel went to one that they had assigned over him. He said, well, give us a test for 10 days. Remember, this was going to be over 3 years, and then they would go before Nebuchadnezzar. So just give us 10 days. Give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. And the word used for vegetables would be of things sown. So that could even include things like wheat and bread and all of that. So just vegetables, a vegetarian diet, and water to drink instead of the wine. He said, then check our appearance and see. And then if we look worse, okay, but if we look better, then let us do this diet. So he listened to them in this matter, tested them for 10 days, and at the end of the 10 days, they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. Now you kind of wonder, I know that the Daniel diet was kind of popular as, like a weight loss thing, but this doesn't look like weight loss to me. It says that they were fatter in flesh. But God made it work for them that they didn't look malnourished, that they didn't look like they were wasting away to nothing, and that even just eating vegetables and not eating the rich fare from the king, that they still didn't look sickly, that they were fatter in flesh. And God didn't give this to us as a way to have a diet to lose weight. That's not why this was put in the Bible. That wasn't its purpose. It's to show God's faithfulness even when they were being judged, even when they were in judgment. And so the steward took away their food and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables. And one thing we can see here is that Daniel chose his battles well. I'm sure he hated having the name of a false god part of his name, that he was always called Belteshazzar wherever he went. I'm sure that grated him the wrong way. Just like if someone was to change your name to then have a false god as part of it because you were conquered by them. I don't like that. But yet Daniel knew, well, I'm defeated. This isn't a battle I'm going to fight. But yet when it came to directly breaking God's law, that's where he said, okay, this I can't do. And we can even learn from that in our society, that as we interact with the society that's growing more and more away from our values, well, what do we do? How do we fight? What are hills to die on? Well, there might be some things where it's like, okay, we don't like that. But, okay, let's say, and this isn't in the Bible, that churches are supposed to be tax-free, but we do enjoy that here in the U.S. That we are not charged taxes, we're not charged property tax, income tax, or anything like that. But there could come a day when they say, what are churches doing for good? Let's go ahead and tax them. Well, we wouldn't like that. We think, you're taking away money we could use for good, but okay, that's not directly violating what God has told us, so we'll submit to that even if we don't like it. But then if it goes in another way that says you have to directly violate what God has laid down in His Word, then we would say no. That we won't do that. And so Daniel chose his battles well. And we also see that God provided for His servants to be faithful. That God worked in the heart of their captors to give them compassion to Daniel. That they, yes, they were afraid of the king, but yet they were compassionate to them. It's like, oh, we want to help. And so they let that test happen. We also see God is sovereign, even over Gentile kings. God is sovereign. God is in control. God knows what He's doing. So even when times get rough, we can know, what, God's in control. We don't always know His plan, but God does, and He is doing what is right. He is doing what is good in His eyes. Then finally, we see God's faithfulness. It says, as for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. So they were in this educational program, and God gave them the ability to understand it, to gain the knowledge, and also know how to use the knowledge. And also Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams, and that will come into play later. But this was from God. You'll notice that Daniel says that, when Nebuchadnezzar says, oh, you have this ability? He says, no, God tells me what this is. This is all of God, not of me. And at the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. The king spoke to them. Among all of them was none found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king. So they stuck out to Nebuchadnezzar. Wow, these guys are capable. I want these guys in my government. And so God put them in those strategic places. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in his kingdom. And so there it says that even in all of these things, Nebuchadnezzar would ask. And so, using magic, he would want to know, okay, is this a good battle to go to? Is this something I should do? What about this? And they would answer that they would be better than the magicians, better than the enchanters, that God gave them wisdom. And so it stuck out that, they're not over there, slaughtering a sheep and looking in its liver for Romans. They're just telling me, well, this is what you should do, king, because of this, this, and this. That they were given wisdom, and that God positioned them there. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. So Daniel was there working in the government, that even the first year of King Cyrus, that he was there. And so Daniel had a long career working in these governments. So we see that God blessed Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, that even though they were punished along with the nation, they were faithful to God, and God blessed them. We may run into that someday where God will bring judgment upon our nation, but yet we should remain faithful, even if things are going wrong around us, because we're part of a society that breaks God's law all the time, that doesn't care what God has to say about thou shalt not murder. No, we go ahead and we like to abort our babies. It says you shall not do this or that, and we say, no, let's celebrate that. And so, no, we may face hardship, but yet we should be faithful to God. And also, God made sure his plan would work, even though Israel was defeated. The Israelites may feel like, oh no, all of our hopes are gone, the temple is destroyed, what should we do? Well, God made sure his plan would work. God was still working behind the scenes. And that even though they felt like maybe they had a reason to start worshiping other gods, well, Israel got defeated, maybe we should worship Bel or Nebo or Marduk or any of those others. But no, they were still faithful to God. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for what you have shown us here, that we can learn from the faithfulness of those that went before us. And Father, we thank you that you are in control, even when we can't understand what's going on, that you know what you're doing, and you are so much more wise than we are, that you know the end from the beginning. And we thank you for your plans and your promises that you have made, and that you always keep those promises. We especially thank you for the promise of the gospel, that Jesus came and died in the place of sinners, that all who believe in him will be forgiven and saved. Thank you for those promises. And it is in the name of your Son, Jesus, that we pray. Amen.